Thank you so much, Celeste. And she didn't reveal this, but Celeste was my press secretary in Ottawa, and very effective because she is originally a Newfoundlander. So when there were reporters who made mistakes, she shared that with them in very colorful language. And that rarely happened, though, right, Celeste? But Celeste is a great example of what has built Alberta in recent decades, a hardworking Atlantic Canadian who's moved here for a bright new future together with her husband. And I want to thank the Insurance Bureau for being a title sponsor. And I was just in the Provincial Operations Centre focused on combating the wildfires yesterday and was very pleased to see a full-time 24-hour representative from the Insurance Bureau. So thank you for being there for those who are affected. I also want to thank Russ Gerling and TC Energy, but I'm going to insist on calling it TransCanada, Russ. I'm sorry. And I want to thank them for being title sponsors. And Russ, I know that everyone in this room, and certainly the government of Alberta, are in your corner. We want to help you guys build those pipelines. I also want to acknowledge, I think we have a quorum of the government caucus here. We have please hold your applause. Ministers Prasad Panda, Sonia Savage, Jason Nixon, Jason Copping, Rick McIver, Doug Schweitzer, Tanya Furr, and MLAs Whitney Isaac and Nick Milliken, and perhaps some I've missed. Thank you all for being here. Before I get started on the topic of reinvigorating Alberta's economy, I too want to address the serious challenge that we are facing in northwestern Alberta with the forest fires. First of all, as you may know, there are 8 states of local emergency that have been declared in northern Alberta involving 4 major forest fires and several smaller ones, and we're constantly on the lookout for potential new fire starts. There have been approximately 10,000 people evacuated from their communities, and we have deployed 2,300 firefighters, 200 helicopters that are doing bucket drops, 27 water bombers, 150 pieces of heavy equipment. As I mentioned, just yesterday I was in the Provincial Operations Centre for the Alberta Emergency Management Agency just after they had elevated their level from 3 to 4, so they're now fully operating, staffed by every relevant government agency and ministry, both federally, provincially, as well as with municipal and private sector partners. I'm very impressed by the degree of professionalism and collaboration that we see both there and on the ground, as I witnessed myself in High Level last week. I hope to be visiting a number of the affected communities in northern Alberta this Sunday to get together with our Forestry Minister, Devin Dreeshen. And I want to really thank local leaders of municipalities, towns, and rural municipalities and First Nations and Métis settlements who have been affected. Collectively, they have shown remarkably strong, capable, and cool-headed leadership under tremendous stress. I think in particular of High-Level Mayor Crystal McTeer, who made the right call to evacuate her community at an optimal moment. And I'm just so deeply impressed with the steady nerves and professionalism of all of those involved, particularly, of course, those on the front line, some of who have been fighting these fires now for 2 weeks. The Government of Alberta has provided emergency cash assistance to the evacuees, totaling $6 million to date, and will provide whatever assistance is needed as we go forward. Obviously, all of this is affecting air quality, and we ask people to be mindful of air quality alerts, which can be found at weather.gc.ca. Because there is no significant precipitation in the weather forecast, we must be prepared for this situation to worsen. New fires could break out at any moment close to communities, not just in the north, but in other parts of the province. So I ask everyone to be vigilant, to follow fire advisories, and to ensure that we continue to focus on public safety. This is a very serious challenge for Northern Albertans right now, but I know all Albertans stand in solidarity with them, and together, although there will be likely weeks more of challenging times, we will get through this because we are Alberta Strong. We'll get through it because we are resilient, just as we, as Albertans, will get together a period of economic adversity because of our resilience. I don't need to tell this room about the challenges that we have been facing. Recent data and commentary suggests that we may, as a province, have been back into another recession in the first part of this year, as I commented in the campaign, was very much a possibility. And I am privileged to lead a government with an unprecedented democratic mandate to reinvigorate that economy, to get Alberta back to work, to restore investor confidence, to demonstrate to Canada and the world that this province is open for business and open for jobs. And that is exactly what we are focused on, and moving at, by government standards, light speed, to demonstrate, to implement our job creation strategy and to get this economy moving again. And we are, as I say, moving as quickly as we can. Now, first, on the first front, we did so by immediate action to stand up for Alberta and global access for our natural resources. We as Albertans are so blessed to be the inheritors of resources that have a current global market value, if we were to commodify them, of well north of $16 trillion. That, for me, represents the hope not just for Alberta, but for Canada, to ensure the highest quality of life, to pay for our obligations to our seniors, to fund healthcare as our population ages, and to be, continue to be a beacon of opportunity for people from all around the world. But we need to be able to develop and sell those resources at a fair price. We all know that. And we also know that a series of government policies, together with a campaign of obstruction led by foreign-funded special interests, have landlocked our energy. And that is why, within 2 hours of being sworn in as Premier, Minister Savage and I appeared before the Senate Transportation Committee to add Alberta's voice in the strongest possible terms to opposition to the prejudicial effort by the federal government to ban a product that is only produced in this province, our bitumen, off of Canada's northwest coast. And I'm pleased to see that that committee heard our message, that this would not just injure our future prosperity, it would not just undermine the sovereignty of First Nations like those along the route and the coast who want to develop resources, but including the Niska First Nation, but that it would injure national unity for the federal government to use the blunt instrument of law to block the export of resources from only one province. I want to thank the Senate Transportation Committee for having heard that message and having decided to effectively kill Bill C-48, to report it back to the Senate as an empty bill. And now we call on all senators to listen to the expertise of their colleagues who made those recommendations, and that in part is why I asked Minister Savage to spend all week in Ottawa. Thank you for doing battle for us down there, Sonia. We appreciate it. Similarly, within 3 days of being sworn in as government, Sonia and I were appearing before the Senate Energy Committee in Ottawa and then meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau to send a very clear message that Bill C-69, what we call the No More Pipelines Act, will be a disaster for the already deeply damaged investor confidence in Canada generally, in Alberta in particular. And that, as we said, this would also deeply damage national unity. I said, could you imagine a federal government at a time when 50% of Quebecers in polls said that they could contemplate separating? Thankfully, it's not like that in Quebec today. But imagine we were at one of those moments in our modern history when passion for sovereignty in Quebec was at a historic high. Could anybody possibly imagine a federal government at that time, and let's imagine Quebec going at that time through a period of economic adversity, coming forward with a bill that would attack Quebec's largest industry? As I said to the senators, it was unthinkable. And I also said that it was a flagrant violation of the exclusive constitutional jurisdiction for Alberta to control the development of our natural resources, a right that Peter Lougheed won historically as a condition precedent of his signature on the Constitution Act in 1982. And I could see, Sonia and I could see heads nodding all around the table, and I'm pleased to report that 2 weeks after that, that Senate committee voted to fundamentally rewrite Bill C-69, accepting all of the amendments of the Government of Alberta and almost all of the amendments of Canada's energy sector. And so we've, again, want to call on the Senate to respect the expertise of their colleagues who have made those recommendations by adopting the bill as amended. If not, our government will launch, if it ultimately comes back as the original version of C-69, we will not hesitate to stand up for our exclusive provincial jurisdiction and our future prosperity by launching a constitutional challenge if it reverts to the original version of that bill. I'm pleased to also tell you that we have solidified Team Alberta around these critical issues. I co-signed a joint letter with NDP leader Notley, Alberta Party leader Mandel, Liberal Party leader David Kahn. We hosted a lunch for Alberta Senate delegation together with former Premier Notley. Whoops. Whoops. Rolls off the tongue after 4 years. All right. And I want to commend Ms. Notley and the other leaders for joining us with this. And now I call upon all of you, so many of you key business leaders in this province, to help us, to send a message, pick up the phone and send an email, convey the importance to our future, our future of shared prosperity, a message that I will be conveying to the government and people of Quebec when I visit that province in 2 weeks' time. So, and finally, so those are two huge, although conditional victories. And we haven't had many in recent years, so I think we should celebrate them and push forward with this momentum, as was the recent 5-0 decision in our favor by the British Columbia Court of Appeal, striking down the latest effort by that government to obstruct our energy. So the wind is in our sails, and we have to keep that momentum. Now, we also have to, of course, do everything within our power to reinvigorate our economy. And that is why we recalled the legislature at the earliest possible opportunity to implement our jobs strategy, beginning with the introduction, and I hope on Monday or Tuesday, our House Leader, what's it going to be, Jason? Putting you on the spot here. Monday, all right, you got that. I'm going to hold you to it. Monday, the adoption of the Carbon Tax Repeal Act, promise made, promise kept. And now, let me pause on that to say, that this is part of our job creation strategy. A major econometric firm, Scopes Economics, estimates that this will create at least 6,000 full-time private sector jobs, will increase the Alberta GDP by $1.2 billion, will reduce an unnecessary deadweight burden on our economy, saving families up to $1,100 a year and small businesses up to $4,500 a year. And so it's important in those respects. But I want to address the notion that this tax, as my opponents claim, was all about the climate. The truth is this, that this was all economic pain and no environmental gain. Professor Mark Jacquard at Simon Fraser University is one of the most articulate defenders of action to reduce carbon emissions. And in an op-ed he published in the Globe and Mail last December, he said, "My research team finds that the new Alberta carbon tax will cause only as much as 5% of the Alberta government's climate plan projected reductions. The heavy lifting is from coal plant phase-out, methane regulations, pre-existing flex reg on large industries, etc. I'll bet Premier Notley wishes an economist had told her she didn't need the tax and that it does almost nothing anyway." So this was, and that is why our government will put forward a credible, practical plan to address the real challenge of climate change and reducing carbon emissions with our Technology, Innovation and Emissions Reduction Fund, the legislation for which will be introduced in October. That will impose, as we've had in the past, a levy on major industrial emitters responsible for about 60% of the emissions in the Alberta economy, and which we believe will reduce emissions directly by about 40 megatons. But more importantly, will put an emphasis on investment in research and applied and theoretical research that will help us to continue reducing carbon intensity from our economy through technologies which we can then export to the developing world, which is where we see the huge increases in CO2 emissions. We need to be honest. Yes, we have to do our part, but imposing massive damage on the Alberta economy that is not being shared by other jurisdictions around the world while we see massive increases in emissions is not a solution. This is one of the reasons, by the way, why we need to get Alberta natural gas to global markets. The single biggest thing we could do to help reduce global CO2 emissions would be massively to increase Alberta LNG exports to Asian and other markets. And in the absence of that, all this does is, as Professor Leach at the University of Alberta has said himself, leads to carbon leakage and what I call capital and jobs leakage. So that is why we're proceeding with Bill number 1, the Carbon Tax Repeal Act. Bill number 2 has been introduced, the Open for Business Act, which restores balance to Alberta's labor legislation and to demonstrate that the government should not take a hostile, aggressive approach towards employers who create jobs. One way in which we are doing so is by restoring workplace democracy, restoring the mandatory requirement for a secret ballot vote before a workplace can be certified. We need to empower workers so that they are not subject to intimidation by either employers or by their union organizers by restoring workplace democracy. And that bill also empowers us to create the youth job creation wage, because we have a youth jobs crisis in this province. There has been a massive decline in the number of young Albertans in the workforce. And amongst those who, in fact, we've gone from a 62 to a 52% labor force participation rate amongst young Albertans. And amongst those, the half of youngest Albertans who are still looking for work, nearly 12% of them are unemployed, twice the average unemployment rate in this province. And we see this most particularly in the hospitality industry, which is often the industry that gives that first job, that first step on the labor market ladder to young people. The average number of employees in an Alberta restaurant has gone from 13.8 to 11.2 in the past 4 years, which essentially means 10,000 fewer jobs for typically young people in our hospitality industry. So the youth job creation wage will incentivize job creators to give those young people their first crack at work experience, which helps to improve their lifetime employment and income prospects. And then we've introduced the Red Tape Reduction Act, Bill number 3, which is a centerpiece in our red tape reduction action plan, which includes the appointment of a dedicated associate minister for red tape reduction. I think he's got the coolest job in cabinet, actually. And we are following the very successful template of the BC Liberal government of Gordon Campbell that we've learned from their success. They set out to reduce by 1/3 the number of regulatory requirements imposed on the BC economy by that provincial government, and in 4 years they overshot that target and managed to reduce it by 41%, which is one of the reasons why BC has had strong economic growth for 15 years and has become a public policy model for jurisdictions across North America and around the world. And we mean to move fast on this. I can tell you that I think almost a majority of our cabinet time to date has already been spent on repealing deadweight, job-killing regulations that also drive away investment from Alberta, and we're barely getting started. We want people in this room, the kind of businesses and industries you represent, to help us succeed in this initiative. Did you know that according to the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Alberta is the only province in Canada to be assessed with an F when it comes to our red tape burden? BC, Quebec, Ontario have A's. You know, what has happened to our idea of get her done Alberta? We all slap ourselves on the back for having this great entrepreneurial culture. But for some reason, in the good years, we allowed an ever-growing layering of regulatory complexity and delays to incrementally grow, and now we find ourselves one of the most overregulated and slowest-moving economies in North America. This is why it took over 5 years to get to a regulatory green light for Imperial Oil's multi-billion-dollar Christina Lake SAGD project, which is using cutting-edge technology. Imagine in the midst of a recession, holding on for years for a multi-billion-dollar job-creating investment. It's why in Texas they can get conventional wells approved in weeks, and it's taking us upwards of 18 months in Alberta. And this does not just apply to the energy sector, but every other sector, which is why we will be creating, through this initiative, industry roundtables for every major industry group. And we need your input to help us identify those regulatory requirements that are holding you back in creating new jobs. We'll also be then expanding that later in our term to include a focused red tape reduction initiative on our charities and nonprofits through the passage of the Freedom to Care Act, which will say that a charity acting in good faith shouldn't be penalized because it doesn't meet the regulatory standards of regs designed for huge corporations, and will give them the benefit of the doubt. And we'll also be launching a major effort to reduce red tape within government as part of our broader effort to realize efficiencies and get back to fiscal balance, and reducing the red tape burden imposed by the Alberta government on our municipalities. And let me say a word about that. The other day I received a text from a Calgary resident, son of a new Canadian, small business people, and this is what he said to me. My dad has worked hard in this country for over 30 years since he's been here, paid taxes, worked his proverbial off, bought some land over time with his blood, sweat, and tears. He has tenants that can't afford to pay their rent anymore due to taxes going insanely high. Not your fault, I know, but come on. This city is dying slowly, and the people that helped build it are suffering the most. I'm in my 30s, and my taxes are slowly killing my future. I care more about my dad, though. He doesn't know how to pay anymore. How can anyone with a small business survive anymore in this city? My dad used to love this city and is now talking about leaving Calgary. I'm sure he isn't the only one. Have you all heard sentiments like that? I certainly have. And our government is going, listen, I want to commend members of City Council here who yesterday announced an effort to provide some at least interim property tax relief to our job creators. They've called on the province to help pitch in money. Well, folks, we are doing that with the job creation tax cut, the single largest tax reduction on employers in Alberta history to reduce the general business tax rate by 1/3, starting with the first point reduction on Canada Day, the second point reduction on New Year's 2020, and by New Year's 2022, we will have a lower business tax, a business tax rate that is 45% lower than the next highest rate in Canada, and we will have a lower combined federal provincial business tax rate in Alberta than 44 of the U.S. states. According to Professor Jack Mintz, this will help to create at least 55,000 new full-time private sector jobs. According to Professor Bev Dalby, it will increase our GDP by $12.7 billion and our per capita GDP by 6.5%, while increasing, he estimates, government revenue by $1.2 billion. There are other projections out there, but here's the point. When we designed our platform, we knew we needed to do something really dramatic to get the attention of investors and of job creators. And that's what is at the heart of our growth strategy, the job creation tax cut. And we call on municipalities to follow our lead in relieving the tax burden and sending a message. And I said this brazenly on Bay Street. Within 4 days of being sworn in as Premier, I went to the Canadian Club and in front of a crowd larger than this, said, I want you to go back to your CFOs, ask them to get out their calculators and figure out how much you could save by moving your operations to Alberta with a 4-point corporate tax reduction. And I'm pleased to tell you that the message is being received. We got, I think, multiple standing ovations at that function, and that was partly an expression of solidarity from the Toronto business community for the difficult times that we are going through. Last Friday, I and my team met with CEOs representing companies that collectively have over $2 trillion of assets under management. And I've spoken to other major global investors in the past 2 to 3 weeks, and I can tell you that Alberta is back on the map for prospective major capital investment, job-creating investment, and stay tuned for some very interesting announcements to come. So, other initiatives, but I'm running late. We're going to bring in this spring the Royalty Guarantee Act to create certainty so that we no longer have unpredictability in the tax regime around our energy industry. And one last key initiative I want to underscore, the creation of the Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. This, I believe, can be a game changer in getting market access, in moving beyond the stale cliches about reconciliation to giving it real practical expression by facilitating First Nations financial participation participation in and ownership of major resource projects. It is time, and it is a moral obligation of our generation to help empower First Nations to move their people from poverty to prosperity. And that is what we will do by facilitating that financial participation, particularly the First Nations that don't have the balance sheets or the financial expertise to do that, so that they can have a stake in pipelines and other major energy projects. So friends, all of this constitutes part of our job creation strategy, and we're only getting started. I look forward to welcoming much of the world here at our Global Petroleum Show next week. The week after next, I'll then be down speaking to major global investors in Montreal. And I will simply close by saying we need Team Alberta not just to be a politically led initiative. We need a renewed sense of that Alberta drive, that entrepreneurial spirit that has drawn so many people to this province, that have helped us to create what has historically been one of the most prosperous and generous societies in the world. And so I ask those of you in the business community to do your part to spread this message that there is a policy direction and, that is obsessed with restoring investor confidence and creating good jobs so that we can pass on to future generations in Alberta that is strong and free. Thank you very much.